I want you to picture this. You land 2 hours ahead of schedule, tired, unshaven, dragging a carry-on with a wheel that squeaks like it's filing a complaint, and the first familiar face you see isn't a rideshare driver or a stranger holding a cardboard sign with your name spelled wrong. It's your neighbor, in pajama pants, circling the arrivals loop for the fourth time like she's casing the building for a robbery. That was my Tuesday. That was the night my quiet, uneventful life quietly stopped being quiet, and I didn't even see it coming until it was already circling past me at 15 miles an hour. My name is Miles Carter. I'm 33. I manage logistics contracts for a mid-sized freight company, and if you'd asked me that morning to describe my life, I would have reached for words like stable, uneventful, fine. Fine is a word people use once they've stopped expecting anything else from a day. I wasn't sad about it exactly. I just settled into a rhythm and stopped questioning the rhythm. Work, gym, grocery store on Thursdays, the occasional beer with my buddy Grant, and a townhouse 2 doors down from a woman named Sadie Monroe, who I knew mostly as the person who sometimes forgot to bring her trash bins in from the curb and who worked nights doing something at the hospital, though I'd never actually asked which department. We were neighborly. We waved. We'd had exactly one real conversation, back in the spring, about a raccoon that had gotten into both our recycling bins on the same night, like it was running a coordinated operation. That was the entire extent of our relationship. 2 adults living parallel lives 8 feet of shared fence apart, close enough to notice each other's porch lights, far enough that neither of us had ever really looked. I'd been in Denver for 4 days on a supplier audit that ran long, sleeping badly in a hotel that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner, and eating more room service club sandwiches than any grown man should ever admit to in public. My flight was scheduled to land at 9:40 p.m. Because of a tailwind nobody bothered explaining to me, we touched down at 7:52. I remember standing at baggage claim thinking, for once, something is actually going right, and feeling almost suspicious of my own good luck, like the universe was setting me up for something later. I hadn't told anyone I'd be early. There wasn't really anyone to tell. My mother lived 3 states away and went to bed religiously at 9. Grant would have come if I'd asked, but I hated asking, hated being the guy who needed a favor on a random Tuesday. I planned on grabbing a rideshare and being home by 9 anyway, so what did 2 stolen hours matter in the grand scheme of things? I walked out through the sliding doors into that specific kind of airport night air, half exhaust fumes, half impatience, and started scanning the curb for wherever the app said my driver would eventually show up. That's when I saw her. A dark green hatchback rolled past the arrival's curb at a crawl, hazards not on, windows fogged faintly at the edges like someone inside had been breathing hard for a while. Behind the wheel, hair piled into a knot that had clearly given up sometime around midnight the night before, was Sadie Monroe, wearing, unmistakably, a set of flannel pajama pants covered in small cartoon foxes, and an old gray zip-up hoodie with a coffee stain running down one sleeve. She looked like a woman who had left her house at a dead sprint and hadn't so much as glanced in a mirror since. I almost let her pass. Almost told myself it wasn't actually her, that plenty of women drive dark green hatchbacks and wear questionable pajamas out in public on a given Tuesday. But then the car came around again 4 minutes later, same lane, same crawl, and this time she was leaning forward over the wheel, scanning every single face at the curb like she was looking for someone she was terrified of missing and equally terrified of finally finding. I stepped off the curb and raised a hand before I'd fully decided to. She saw me. Her whole face did something complicated, relief and confusion arguing for control of the same expression, and she swerved toward the curb hard enough that the driver behind her leaned on his horn in protest. The window came down. "Miles." "Hey," I said, because apparently that was the best opening line I had in me. Are you here for someone?" She stared at me like I'd asked the question in a language she'd only half studied. "What are you doing at the airport?" "I live here now, actually. Great school district. Very walkable." I gestured vaguely at my suitcase. "I got off a flight." "What are you doing at the airport? In your pajamas?" She glanced down at herself like she'd genuinely forgotten what she was wearing, which told me more than any actual explanation could have managed. It's a long story. I've got 2 free hours I wasn't expecting to have, I said. Free ones. Fully unclaimed. I'm flexible. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one passing through the middle of a very bad night. Get in before I get another honk. I'll explain in the car. I should tell you, if I'd had any real sense that evening, I would have called my rideshare driver, apologized for the mix-up, and let my neighbor handle whatever 3 a.m. crisis had put her behind a wheel in cartoon Fox pajamas at 8 p.m. That would have been the reasonable thing to do. I threw my suitcase in her back seat instead, and I've never once regretted it. The second I shut the door, the smell of the car told its own story before Sadie said a word. Coffee, gone cold in the cup holder. A phone charger cord tangled uselessly on the floor mat. A duffel bag half-zipped in the passenger footwell that I had to move my feet around to fit. Sadie pulled back into the loop traffic, both hands tight on the wheel, knuckles pale in the dashboard light. So, I said carefully, circling arrivals in your sleepwear isn't, like, a hobby of yours that I've just somehow never noticed in a year of living next door. No. She exhaled hard through her nose. My sister called me at 4 this morning. Okay. She was crying so hard I couldn't understand her for the first 2 minutes straight. I genuinely thought someone had died, Miles. I was already halfway into my shoes before she got a full sentence out. Nobody died, I said, half question, half quiet hope. No. Worse, according to her. Her fiancé, Tyler, the one she's been planning a wedding with for 14 months, told her at 1 in the morning that he'd taken a job offer in Seattle and accepted it without telling her a single thing about it. Flight leaves today. He wants her to, quote, figure it out from here, because he's, quote, not going to let her hold his entire career hostage. I felt my jaw tighten on this stranger's behalf without meaning to. Charming man. She said she needed to see him before he left. Talk him out of it, talk some sense into him. I honestly don't know what her plan was. She doesn't drive well when she's upset, so she called me instead of an Uber, because apparently at 4 in the morning I'm still the responsible sister, even though I'd worked a 13-hour shift and gone to bed 40 minutes before her call woke me straight back up. So you're picking her up. I'm picking her up from wherever she currently is, because her phone died somewhere between the meltdown and now, and the last text I got said she was, quote, going to catch him at the gate like it's the ending of a movie. Sadie glanced sideways at me, exhausted, wired, somewhere far past caring how any of this looked. I've been circling because I don't know which terminal, I don't know which airline, and security won't let me park at the curb longer than 90 seconds without threatening to have me towed. That's a lot for a Tuesday. You genuinely have no idea. She rubbed one eye with the heel of her hand, careful to keep her other hand on the wheel. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I promise I would have looked significantly less insane if I'd known I was picking up a neighbor along with my sister's dignity tonight. For the record, I said, the Fox pajamas are really working for you. That earned me the first real laugh out of her, small and startled, like it had escaped before she'd given it official permission. Don't. I'm being completely serious. Very confident choice for a public appearance. I own real clothes, Miles. I believe you. I'm just saying, in a genuine crisis, foxes. She shook her head, but some of the tension eased out of her shoulders, just barely, just enough that I could actually see it happen in the dashboard light. We looped past the terminal a 5th time, both of us scanning the sliding doors for a woman who might or might not still be inside, might or might not have already found her runaway fiancé, might or might not need rescuing from a scene entirely of her own making. What's her name? I asked. Your sister, Piper. She's 26, she paints houses for a living, and she has never once in her entire life done anything the calm way. Sadie said it with the very specific fondness people reserve for family members who exhaust them completely and permanently. If she's not out here in the next loop, I'm parking illegally and going in after her. I'll come with you, I said. And I meant it before I'd fully thought through whether that was a strange offer to make to a woman I'd exchanged maybe 40 words with across an entire year of living near each other. She looked at me for a second too long. You really don't have to do that. I've got 2 free hours, I reminded her. I already told you. I'm flexible. We didn't end up having to park illegally. On the sixth pass, we spotted Piper standing outside the terminal doors under the covered walkway, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, arms crossed so tight around herself it looked like she was physically trying to hold her own ribs together. Mascara streaked halfway down one cheek. No suitcase, no purse even, just her phone clutched in one hand like a life raft in open water. Sadie didn't even bother signaling. She just cut across 2 lanes to the curb, ignoring the horn behind us entirely, and had her door open before the car had fully stopped rolling. Piper. Her sister's face crumpled the moment she saw her. He left. I know, honey. Get in the car. He didn't even look back at the gate, Sadie. I stood there, and he just walked through security like I was some stranger who happened to be crying near him. I climbed into the back seat without being asked, partly to free up the front for Piper, partly because it felt like the kind of moment where a near stranger should make himself as small and useful as physically possible. Piper folded into the passenger seat, and Sadie reached across the console and pulled her into an awkward, seatbelt-tangled hug before either of them said another word. I'm going to drive, Sadie said finally, pulling back onto the road, and you're going to tell me everything. And then we're going to get you food, because I guarantee you haven't eaten a real meal since yesterday afternoon. I'm not hungry. You're always hungry. That's not a symptom of heartbreak. That's a symptom of being a Monroe. Sadie caught my eye in the rearview mirror for half a second, something apologetic flickering in it. Miles, I am so sorry. I know this is not the airport pickup you signed up for tonight. I signed up for nothing, I said. I flagged down a woman in pajamas circling arrivals like a hawk. This is objectively more interesting than my original plan, which was silence and a stranger holding a cardboard sign. Piper turned around in her seat far enough to look at me properly for the first time, eyes red-rimmed and curious despite everything falling apart around her. Who is this? My neighbor, Sadie said. Miles. He got off a plane and I accidentally kidnapped him. I got involuntarily, I clarified. For the record, and for any future legal proceedings. Piper managed something close to a laugh, wet and unsteady, but real. Nice to meet you, neighbor Miles. Sorry you're watching my life implode in real time. Implosions are more interesting live than in stories afterward, I said. I'll allow it, this once. That earned me a genuine, if exhausted, smile, and something in the car's temperature shifted, just slightly, from raw crisis to something a little more survivable. We ended up at a 24-hour diner near the airport, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and a laminated menu the size of a small newspaper, because Sadie insisted Piper needed pancakes more than she needed another minute of relitigating exactly what Tyler had said at 1 a.m. I sat across from the two of them in a booth that smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee, still in my rumpled travel clothes, feeling like a man who'd wandered into the middle of someone else's movie and had, against every instinct of self-preservation, decided to stay for the second act anyway. Piper talked. A lot. About the 14 months of planning, the deposit on a venue that was now going to become an argument all its own, the fact that Tyler had apparently been quietly interviewing in Seattle for 3 months without ever mentioning it, the fact that when she'd finally found out, his defense had been that he didn't want to stress her out before it was real, about how she'd stumbled across the offer letter in his email, still logged in on their shared laptop, dated 2 full weeks earlier. 2 weeks, she said, stabbing a piece of pancake like it had personally wronged her family. He's been carrying that around for 2 weeks and letting me pick out centerpieces the entire time. That's not an accident, Sadie said quietly. That's a decision he made fresh every single day for 2 weeks straight. Piper's eyes filled again, but she nodded, like hearing it out loud from her sister made it somehow more bearable, less like something to argue against, and more like something to simply survive and eventually walk away from. I mostly listened. Every so often, Sadie would glance at me like she expected me to look for the nearest exit, and every time, I just refilled my coffee and stayed exactly where I was. There's something about watching someone be steady for another person, patient in a way that visibly costs them something. That tells you more about a person's character in 40 minutes than a full year of hallway waves ever could. Somewhere around Piper's third cup of decaf, she excused herself to the bathroom, and it was just Sadie and me at the table, the diner's hum of clattering plates and low country music filling the space, where conversation usually goes when two people aren't sure yet what they're allowed to say to each other. "You've been quiet," she said. "I'm pacing myself. I used up all my good material on the Fox pajamas already." She smiled down into her coffee. "Thank you. Genuinely. You didn't have to sit through any of this with us. I told you. 2 free hours. It's been closer to 2.5 at this point. I have flexible hours," I said. "It's kind of my entire personality, apparently." She looked at me properly then, the exhaustion in her face not gone, but softened, curious in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Not once in a year of trash bin waves and one raccoon-related text exchange. "I've lived next to you for over a year, and I don't think I've ever actually talked to you. Not like this." We did discuss the raccoon at length. That was a text exchange about property damage. This is different. She wrapped both hands around her mug like it was the only warm thing left in the building. "You're not what I expected, honestly." "What did you expect?" "Nothing, if I'm being truthful. I never let myself think about it long enough to build an expectation." She said it lightly, but something underneath the words landed heavier than the tone suggested, and I found myself sitting a little straighter, paying closer attention than a comment about property damage would ever normally require. "Well," I said, "for what it's worth, I've spent the last year assuming you were either a surgeon or ran some kind of elaborate crime ring, based purely on the hours you keep." "You're a nurse," she said. "Considerably less glamorous than either option, unfortunately." "More useful than either option," I said, and I meant it. And something about the way she looked at me after I said it made the diner feel smaller and warmer than it had any right to feel at 11 p.m. with her sister's broken engagement still cooling on the table between us. Piper came back from the bathroom with her makeup wiped mostly clean, looking younger somehow, more like a person who'd just finished crying out the worst of it and was starting, tentatively, to consider what came next. "Okay," she said, sliding back into the booth. "I've decided something." "Should I be nervous?" Sadie asked. "I'm not calling him. I'm not texting him. I'm not doing the thing where I spend the next 3 weeks trying to figure out what I did wrong, because I know exactly what I did wrong, which is nothing at all. He made a decision and hid it from me for 2 weeks, and let me keep planning an entire wedding around a lie." Piper said it more steadily than I'd have expected from someone who'd been sobbing in an airport terminal 4 hours earlier. "I'm going to go stay with Mom for a few days. And then I'm going to figure out what happens to a deposit on a venue when the groom moves to Seattle without ever telling the bride." "That's the correct order of operations," Sadie said, and reached over to squeeze her sister's hand once, firm. We drove Piper to their mother's place first, a small ranch house on the edge of town with a porch light already burning, like their mother had somehow known, the way mothers sometimes just know, that tonight would end with a daughter back on her doorstep. Piper hugged Sadie for a long time in the driveway, and then, unexpectedly, hugged me too, quick and fierce. "Thanks for not being weird about all this," she said into my shoulder. "I peaked at weird around hour 1, I said. "I'm all out of it now." She laughed for real that time, and it was good to hear. And then she was gone up the walkway, into the porch light, into her mother's waiting arms, and it was just Sadie and me in the car again, the dashboard clock reading well past midnight. 2 hours of unexpected free time, having quietly stretched into something closer to 5. "I should get you home," Sadie said, pulling back onto the road. "You've been awake since, what, 5 this morning your time?" "Something close to that." I looked over at her, at the exhaustion carved into her face, the pajama pants she'd never had the chance to change out of, the coffee stain on her sleeve that had been there since before dawn. "You've had a longer day than I have, and you're the one who's been driving all of it." Occupational hazard of being the responsible sister. Somebody should be responsible for you tonight, I said, and I hadn't fully planned to say it out loud, but once it was out in the open, I found I didn't want to take it back. She glanced at me, something flickering across her face too fast to name properly. Is that an offer? I make an excellent grilled cheese, I said. It's not a grand gesture. It's just, you've been running on adrenaline and cold coffee since 4 a.m., and my kitchen is 8 feet from yours, and I genuinely don't think either of us should be alone right now after how tonight went. She was quiet for a second, long enough that I wondered if I'd overstepped, crossed some invisible line between friendly neighbor and something else entirely that neither of us had a name for yet. Okay, she said finally, but if the grilled cheese is bad, I'm telling the entire neighborhood, starting with the mailman. Fair terms. I accept the risk. We ended up at my kitchen counter at nearly 1 in the morning, her still in the fox pajamas, me finally out of my travel clothes and into sweatpants, 2 grilled cheese sandwiches between us, and a silence that had stopped being awkward somewhere around the second slice of cheese hitting the pan. She told me about nursing, about the kind of night shifts that teach you to read an entire room in 3 seconds flat, about how she'd moved into the townhouse 2 years earlier after a relationship that had ended quietly. No drama, just 2 people who'd gradually stopped choosing each other somewhere along the way without either of them noticing when it happened. I told her about the audit trip, about my mother 3 states away who went to bed at 9 sharp, about the particular, specific loneliness of being fine, which I hadn't actually said out loud to another person in longer than I wanted to admit to myself, let alone to her. You know, she said, halfway through her sandwich, I almost didn't stop the car when I first saw you standing at the curb. Why not? Because I looked like this. She gestured down at the foxes on her pants. And because some tiny, exhausted part of my brain went, that's Miles. He's about to see you in pajamas at 8 p.m. circling an airport like an actual lunatic. And that felt like a very specific kind of humiliation I wasn't remotely prepared for. For the record, I said, it's the most interesting I've found you in an entire year of trash bin waves. She laughed, and it was warmer this time. Easier, the kind of laugh that only comes out once a person has finally stopped bracing for the next bad thing to land. That's a low bar, Miles. I don't actually think it is, I said, and meant every word of it. And the kitchen went quiet again, but a different kind of quiet this time, the kind that carries weight, the kind 2 people sit inside carefully, because neither one wants to be the one who breaks it wrong. I should go home, she said eventually, without moving an inch. It's late. You've had a 14-hour day. You've had a 20-hour day, easily. Occupational hazard, she said again, softer this time, and neither of us moved for another long stretch. And when she finally did stand up from the counter, she paused at the door with one hand resting on the frame. Thank you for getting in the car, she said. I mean that sincerely. Most people would have just waited for their actual scheduled ride. Most people don't get offered fox pajamas and a family crisis in the same 5 minutes, I said. I wasn't about to pass that opportunity up. She smiled, tired and completely real, and for a second I thought she might say something more, and I thought I might say something more too, and instead she just squeezed my arm once, said goodnight, and walked the 8 feet back to her own front door under the very same porch light we'd apparently been sharing, unnoticed, for over a year of quiet evenings. 3 weeks later, I didn't sleep much that first night. Not entirely because of the jet lag, though that certainly didn't help matters. I kept replaying the exact moment her car had rolled past the curb, hazards off, eyes scanning, and how something in me had stepped off that curb before I'd made any conscious decision to move at all. Some part of me had recognized something in her before I'd even had the words for it. 3 days passed before I saw her again properly, both of us caught in that particular rhythm neighbors fall into after sharing something significant and then not quite knowing what to do with it once daylight returns. I noticed her car in the driveway some mornings and not others. I found myself, for the first time in a full year, actually tracking which shifts she seemed to be working, which was a strange thing to admit even to myself. This sudden interest in a schedule I'd never once bothered to notice before that Tuesday. On the fourth day, she knocked on my door around 7 in the evening, holding a foil-covered dish out in front of her like an offering. "Piper made too much lasagna," she said, the moment I opened the door. "As a coping mechanism, apparently. Grief cooking. I currently have 3 full pans of it, and a freezer that's already at capacity." "I'm very familiar with grief cooking," I said. "My mother handled my parents' entire divorce with one long winter of casseroles." "Then you understand the emergency I'm facing." She held the dish out further. "Also, I wanted to say thank you again. Properly this time. Not diner parking lot thank you. Actual, sit-down thank you. You already thanked me twice." "I know. But you sat in a booth for 2 straight hours listening to my sister dismantle a 14-month relationship in real time. And then you fed me grilled cheese at 1 in the morning, and I don't think either of those things happens to most people on a random Tuesday night." "I told you," I said. "Best 2 free hours I've had in years, hands down." She looked at me for a long moment. Lasagna dish still held out between us like a small, strange piece offering neither of us fully understood yet. "Do you want to come in and eat this with me? I feel genuinely weird eating an entire pan of grief lasagna alone." I did. Of course I did. And that dinner turned into a second one 2 days later, and a third the following week, each one running a little longer, feeling a little easier, the space between us on her couch shrinking a little further each time without either of us consciously noticing when it happened. We talked about everything and about nothing at all. Her patients, the ones she couldn't share details about but circled around anyway, the particular exhaustion and grace of watching people at their absolute most frightened and staying steady for them anyway. My work, the audits and freight contracts that had somehow started feeling, for the first time in years, like something genuinely worth coming home to talk about instead of just something to quietly survive each week. The complication. About 2 months in, right around the time I'd started leaving a toothbrush at her place without either of us formally discussing it, Tyler came back into the picture, though not in the way either of us expected. Piper had been handling the fallout from the broken engagement with more grace than any of us had a right to ask of her, splitting the venue deposit, boxing up a ring she refused to sell out of some stubborn principle, slowly rebuilding a life that no longer had a wedding-shaped hole in the middle of it. Then, on a Thursday night, Sadie's phone rang while we were mid-dinner at my kitchen table, and I watched her whole face change the second she read the name on the screen. "It's Piper," she said, already standing. "She's crying again." This time it wasn't Tyler leaving. It was Tyler calling, 3 months into his Seattle job, saying the position had fallen through in some corporate reorganization nobody had bothered warning him about. And could they maybe talk? Could she maybe give him another chance? He'd made a mistake. He saw that now. He just needed her to understand that. Sadie drove straight to her mother's house that night, and I went with her without being asked, the way you do once a habit like that has quietly formed between 2 people. Piper was a wreck on the porch steps, phone in her lap, torn between 11 months of history and the very fresh memory of standing alone at a gate watching a man walk through security without looking back. "What do I even do?" Piper asked, looking between the 2 of us like we might have an answer she didn't already know herself. Sadie sat down beside her sister on the cold concrete step. No hesitation at all. "You already know what you do. You knew it the second you saw his name light up your phone, and your stomach dropped instead of your heart lifting. That's your answer, Piper. That's the whole answer. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," Sadie said, gentle but unmoving. "It just doesn't feel simple, because you loved him. Those are 2 very different things, and you're allowed to hold both at once without changing what you do next." I stayed quiet on the porch, hands in my pockets, watching a woman I'd known for barely 2 months hold her sister together with a steadiness I was starting to understand wasn't a performance at all, just who she actually was underneath everything. At 4 a.m. or 7 p.m., pajamas or real clothes, it didn't matter. Piper texted Tyler back an hour later, in front of both of us, a short message that said simply, "I hope Seattle taught you something, because I'm not interested in being your backup plan." Then she blocked his number, handed her sister the phone like evidence in a case that was finally fully closed, and asked if anyone wanted to split a pizza, because apparently grief still made her hungry, same as always. Sadie caught my eye over Piper's head that night, something tired and grateful passing between us without either of us needing to say a word out loud. That was the night I think I fully understood I wasn't just enjoying her company anymore. I was building something around her, a little at a time, without ever having decided to on purpose. Saying it out loud. 3 weeks after that porch conversation, on a night Sadie wasn't working, she showed up at my door in real clothes for once. Jeans and a soft green sweater, hair down instead of piled into its usual exhausted knot. "I have a confession," she said, standing on my porch under that same shared light. "That's an ominous opener. I've been finding reasons to bring you food for almost 2 months now because I like you, and I'm apparently terrible at saying that directly. So instead I've just been weaponizing my sister's emotional baking against you." I felt something in my chest loosen, a tension I hadn't fully clocked I was even carrying around. "I noticed the pattern," I said. "I was starting to think you just deeply believed in my caloric needs." "Miles, I like you too," I said, before she had to ask a second time. Before either of us could talk ourselves back into 8 feet of careful distance and polite hallway waves. "I have, actually, since approximately the moment I saw a woman in fox pajamas circling an airport like she was casing it for a heist. That is genuinely the least romantic origin story in recorded human history." "I disagree completely," I said. "I think it's the only kind that would have actually worked on either of us. Anything smoother, and either one of us would have talked ourselves right out of it before it started." She smiled, the kind that reaches all the way up into someone's eyes, and stepped closer on the porch, close enough that the light we'd apparently been sharing for over a year without either of us noticing finally, fully meant something between us. "So what happens now?" "Now," I said, "I take you on an actual date. One where nobody's fiancé has skipped town to Seattle and nobody's wearing pajamas, unless you specifically want to keep that as a running theme. I reserve the right to wear pajamas on any date I personally choose," she said. "That's non-negotiable, Miles." Noted and fully accepted. She kissed me on the porch that night, first careful, and then not careful at all, and it felt less like the start of something brand new and more like the continuation of something that had been quietly circling both our lives for a lot longer than either of us had let ourselves admit. The way her car had circled arrivals that first night, looking for exactly the right moment to finally stop. Settling in. We took it slow after that, in the deliberate way people take things slow when they already suspect, somewhere deep down, that it's going to matter for a long time. Actual dates, the kind with reservations and real clothes, and me actually ironing a shirt for once. A hike that turned into a genuine argument about whether a trail counted as a loop or an out and back, which we eventually settled by getting completely and thoroughly lost and blaming each other the entire walk back to the car. Sunday mornings that slowly started drifting into each other's kitchens without either of us officially deciding that was now allowed. Piper, for her part, recovered in the specific, loud way people recover when they refuse to let heartbreak make them smaller than they were before it. She started dating a guy from her gym a few months later, someone named Dean who, according to her, has never once in his life kept a secret from anyone, mostly because he has zero impulse control, which I've decided I actually prefer after everything. She and Sadie grew closer through the whole ordeal rather than more distant, the way some sisters do after surviving a crisis together. The 4 a.m. phone call slowly becoming a story they told at dinner parties instead of a wound either of them still carried alone. Tyler, we heard through the efficient grapevine of a small town, tried calling one more time around the holidays and got the same silence he'd earned. Piper mentioned it once, almost offhandedly, over dinner. "Some people think an apology 3 months late still counts as timing," she said. "It doesn't. It just counts as 3 months late." 6 months after that first night at the airport, Sadie's lease came up for renewal, and instead of signing it again, she moved 8 feet into my townhouse, into a life that had stopped feeling like two parallel, careful existences and had started feeling, gradually and then suddenly, like one shared one. She brought her ridiculous fox pajamas with her, which I made her promise, formally, never to donate, on the grounds that they were, at this point, a load-bearing part of our entire origin story. We fell into new rhythms together that felt nothing like the old separate ones. She started leaving her shoes by my door instead of hers. I started buying the specific brand of coffee she liked instead of whatever was cheapest that week. Grant, my buddy who'd never once met her before that year, told me at a barbecue that summer that he'd never seen me talk about anyone the way I talked about her, animated in a way he said he didn't recognize from the last several years of knowing me. I hadn't noticed it happening in real time. It's strange how the biggest changes in a person are often the ones they're the last to see clearly in themselves. Full circle. A year after that first night, on a Tuesday, of all days, because we'd both developed a soft, private spot for Tuesdays by then, I took her back to the airport. Not to pick anyone up, not to circle arrivals looking for a runaway sister, just to walk the same stretch of curb where I'd first raised my hand and she'd first swerved toward me, hazards not on, in pajamas she'd never once planned on anyone else seeing that night. "Why are we here?" she asked, laughing, looking around at the same sliding doors, the same honking taxis, the same fluorescent hum of a place neither of us had any actual travel reason to be standing inside of. "I wanted to propose somewhere memorable," I said, "and I figured the exact spot where you almost ran over a stranger trying to rescue your sister was about as memorable as it was ever going to get." Her hand came up to cover her mouth. "Miles, I got off a plane 2 hours early because of a tailwind nobody bothered warning me about," I said, getting down on one knee right there on the curb, ignoring the honking, ignoring the security guard already eyeing us with mild professional concern. "And you were circling this exact spot in cartoon fox pajamas, looking for someone you loved. I've spent every single day since then wanting to be the reason you finally stop circling and just land somewhere for good. So, Sadie Monroe, will you marry me?" She said yes before I'd even finished getting the ring fully out of my pocket. Yes through tears. Yes while the security guard actually started clapping along. Yes while a stranger nearby filmed the entire thing on his phone for reasons neither of us have ever fully understood but have decided, in the years since, to be endlessly grateful for. Because it's the only footage that exists of the exact spot where two quietly parallel lives finally, completely intersected. We got married the following spring, in a backyard, small and simple on purpose, because we both agreed there was something fitting about not needing anything grand after the way we'd actually found each other. Piper was maid of honor, and in her toast, she told the entire room that her broken engagement was, and I quote, "genuinely the best thing that ever happened to my sister's love life. So honestly, Tyler, wherever you are, you're welcome." Sadie made me promise the fox pajamas would make an appearance at some point during the getting ready photos, and they did, briefly, before she changed into the actual dress, because some traditions absolutely deserve documentation for the record. My mother flew in for the wedding, 3 states and one very early bedtime later than usual, and told Sadie privately at the reception that she'd never seen her son laugh the way he did now. Easily. Often. Like laughing had stopped being something that required effort. I don't think I fully believed her until I heard it back secondhand. The way you sometimes need someone else to name a change in you before you can actually see it clearly yourself. These days, when people ask how we met, Sadie tells them she was circling an airport at midnight, exhausted, terrified, still in her pajamas, looking for her sister. And I tell them I got off a plane 2 hours early and saw her. And something in me just knew, immediately, before I even had a reason to. Both of those things are completely true. Neither one is the whole story. The whole story is that sometimes the person who's been 8 feet away from you the entire time is the one you finally see clearly. Not on some perfectly planned evening you spent weeks preparing for, but in the middle of someone else's crisis, at midnight, at an airport, in pajamas covered in cartoon foxes, circling and circling until the right person finally steps off the curb and says, "Get in, I've got 2 free hours. And I'm flexible." So tell me, what would you have done if you landed early and saw your quiet, easy to overlook neighbor circling arrivals in her pajamas, clearly in the middle of some kind of crisis? Would you have flagged her down without a second thought, or let the moment pass you by like just another stranger's bad night on the way to your own front door? And have you ever had an ordinary, uneventful life quietly interrupted by the one person who'd been close enough to matter the whole time, if you'd only actually looked their way? Sometimes I still think about how easily I could have missed the whole thing. If my flight had landed on schedule instead of 2 hours early, I would have walked out into a dark, ordinary night, found my actual rideshare driver, and gone home to a quiet townhouse without ever knowing my neighbor was circling that same stretch of curb, terrified, in pajamas, looking for a sister she loved enough to leave her own bed at 4 in the morning for. We would have kept waving at each other from our separate driveways for another year, maybe longer, maybe forever, two people close enough to matter and too careful to ever find out. That's the part that still gets me, even now. Not the Fox pajamas, not the airport, not even the proposal. It's the 2 hours. 2 hours nobody planned. 2 hours neither of us asked for. And somehow the exact 2 hours that ended up matching more than every other hour that came before them combined. Tell me your story in the comments below. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.